Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Human AF podcast. I am your co host, Steph Steph.
And I am your other co-host, Steph Taylor.
So, today we are super excited to be continuing our conversation about boundaries with you all. This is such a powerful discussion last time that we just knew, we have to keep going deeper into this topic and continue what we
Hmm
were talking about. So, here we are.
Yeah, it is definitely such an important topic. And as we touched on in the last episode, there's, I think, just a common misconception because we're not really taught what boundaries are. And boundaries we sort of put in to like try and control stuff. We want to control how someone's making us feel, right? Like
Right.
we're taught
Yeah.
at such a young age. When I'm having this conversation a lot with my kids,
Hmm.
or noticing it more when we talk about feelings. It's, oh, how did that make you feel? How did that person make you feel? And in reality, like no one can make you feel something. You're
Hmm.
outsourcing your power, and that starts at such a young age. And I think
Yeah.
most people listening were you'll start to become aware of that when you're talking to people. Oh, that, you know, how did that make you feel? Oh, that person made me feel this. No, they didn't. So when you put in boundaries, the misconception is you are trying to change the other person's behavior by telling them, don't do that anymore. That makes me upset.
Right.
You
When really
feel
it's
like,
about you and all you can
yeah,
control how you behave in response to however that person is behaving.
yeah, it's like we've missed this key thing of no, 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 it's not about the other person. You're giving the other person an opportunity to change their behavior, but you can't control how they react to it.
Right. And I feel like it's really interesting because it's so ingrained in us that even though I've done all of this work on myself and like I really understood the fact that like what you were saying before, nobody can make me feel anything, nobody can make me do anything really. And I understand that concept, but yet I still wasn't clear on what boundaries actually were until you broke it down for me in the last episode. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting that it's like you've got to go really deep into understanding and breaking down all of this stuff because we are so trained as like in terms of like thinking that boundaries are about controlling other people when it's once again it's just reinforcing what you need and what you desire.
Yeah, like it perpetuates the problem because we are not really given examples of what it looks like.
Mhm.
So, in the last episode, actually breaking down what a boundary is in a real life example, when you look at it of no, someone's pushing up against my boundary, most people would go and get mad. It's like, no, you didn't change my behavior. Like I put in this thing and you're not changing your behavior. So I'm really mad. And you get stuck in this spiral of anger towards the other person, when in reality, that's you continuing to outsource your power and your value. You're
Right.
making it about, you're making your value about their behavior when
Right.
you actually, oh, you're giving them a choice, an opportunity of, hey, I don't like it when you do this. It makes me, or I feel this way when you do this. If you continue to do this, I will then do this. I will walk
Right.
away. Like you then bring your power back so that you can release the anger or the emotions that are tied to that person's behavior. You pull it back. And don't get me wrong, this is hard.
Oh yeah.
It is so hard because our emotions, you can be so upset with
Right.
certain people in your life that are kind of pushing your buttons, and so it's hard to release that emotion when you're like, oh, but if only they changed this behavior, things would be so much better. And now they're getting mad that I've then removed myself from the situation. And when you start to really look at it and like pull yourself back more and more and really look at it, it's, they're acting like a child.
Right.
And honestly, I was acting like a child when I was throwing a little temper tantrum of like, if only they would change, if only they would change, things would be so much better. Well,
Right.
no, you can't control them. You can only control yourself. And it gets easier with time.
Mm-hmm.
And having like a friend, a friend to do that little temper tantrum with anytime somebody pushes up against your boundary and makes you, or like, and you feel upset. See, I still say makes you, but you feel upset. Having that friend to just talk out your reaction
Mm-hmm.
so you can stay stable in communicating your boundary or not reacting to somebody pushing up against your boundary is so key.
A boundary buddy.
Yeah, exactly. A boundary buddy. I love that.
Highly recommend a boundary buddy. You've definitely been my boundary buddy through quite a few
Mm-hmm.
situations. So thank you.
Well,
Uh,
thank you too. I mean, the boundaries that I've had you talking through with me.
yeah, no, it really does help. And as you were talking, I was actually kind of thinking, sometimes I hear a lot of people on social media talking about how, they upheld their boundaries, and because they upheld their boundaries, so and so did XYZ, and they're so proud of themselves. And like, that's great. I'm so happy for those people that like they upheld their boundaries, and as a result somebody did something. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that even if the best case scenario worked out, and like, you were able to get your way, I still think that's a misunderstanding of boundaries. Like, okay, just
Mm-hmm.
because somebody did something that aligned with what you wanted, the I feel like there's still a lack of understanding there about what the boundary actually did.
Yeah. Yeah. It's someone putting in a boundary. You often hope that the other person will change their behavior
So that you
or
don't have to do
towards you.
anything. Yeah.
Exactly. So that, things can go back to hunky dory type of deal. But in actuality, that's a bonus.
Right.
Really, a boundary should bring you more peace. And it it can take some time for certain situations, but a boundary should definitely bring you more peace. And it often, when you have to put boundaries in and hold them, they are with people. There's that quote of the people who are upset about your boundaries are the ones who were using you when you had none. So you can hope for changed behavior, but that's a bonus. It should literally be, hey, it doesn't matter if you change. I respect myself and
Right.
I won't be treated like that. And I'm going to keep my power and I'm going to make sure that I don't have people that treat me like crap in my life. So I'm going to remove myself and distance myself. Maybe we don't talk about this topic or whatever it might be. You can still have a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but it's hoping that someone will change or have it, but that's not what a boundary is. A
Right.
boundary is about protecting your peace and letting.
Right.
I was having this conversation with my mom actually the other day of just someone might try and push your boundaries and get you to break them. But in reality, something like, okay, is literally a sentence in and of itself that can completely neutralize whatever it is they're doing.
Right.
It's just,
So the boundary
okay.
is simply neutralizing the situation and
Mm-hmm.
protecting how you feel about it. And if somebody else reacts in a way that you like, that's wonderful. And if somebody doesn't react in a way that you like, or like they completely go the opposite way of what you would want, that's wonderful too. You protected your peace.
Yeah. And
That's the
quite
point.
frankly, I think a boundary really, like just as you said that, a boundary really shows you the types of people you should have in your life. Because if someone's not going to respect when you say, I don't feel good when that happens, or I don't like the way that you're speaking to me, and it's not okay. If someone is going to react negatively to that, number one, that's on them. That's their little temper tantrum of being told no. And you don't want someone treating you like that.
Right.
You want the people that are, oh, you put in a boundary and they're like, oh, geez, I'm so sorry, absolutely respect that. And they change their behavior.
Right.
And it's not a big thing.
Right. And I feel like, one of the beautiful things about boundaries is like when you really stand in them and you say like these are non-negotiable, like this is how I protect my peace. So like you need to respect that in order to be in my world. Like you also at first people might resist a little bit, maybe they might rebel, but eventually once your people fall in line and learn like this is what it means to respect you, you're kind of giving them permission to set boundaries within themselves, which I've seen firsthand, and it's such a beautiful thing to witness. Like I'm so proud of my people who have now started to set boundaries, and I'm so grateful that like I got to be a part of their journey and like that I've gotten to witness them stand in their power or whatever by setting their own boundaries. Like it's so cool.
Yeah. It's like you give people examples and permission of what it looks like, what it really looks like to put in a boundary, and how that literally changes how you feel about yourself and how you then relate to other people and how you can then be firm but still loving.
Right. Like an example of what I'm thinking, and I'm still sort of wrapping my head around this, like after 20, 30 years of not understanding what a boundary actually was. So let me know if I'm misinterpreting the situation. But since I've started setting boundaries, my husband Sean has also started setting boundaries with me. Um, I used to like just be the laziest person on the planet. And like I would constantly like wake him up to like go get me coffee, which is really embarrassing to admit. But I did that. That's what I did. I just like expected him to wait on me hand and foot. And like I was and I don't want to like so I was interrupting his peace. Or he felt that his peace was interrupted because instead of being able to sit on the couch and play with the dogs or watch the show he was watching, he was constantly being interrupted and had to like get up from whatever he was doing to go, serve me, which was not cool. So he's now started to set boundaries like around when he is sitting and watching TV after a really long day of work. Like he wants to sit and watch TV and not be interrupted. And that's cool. So now that he's seeing me set my boundaries with like what I want to do with my free time, he's now taking a leaf out of my book and doing the same. And I find that our time together is so much better because we're not constantly pushing up against each other's boundaries. Like we know how we like to spend our free time, and it's making our relationship that much better.
I love that. I love that you guys were able to have that communication and see it for each other. You could really, really see that. Because sometimes one of the things that I was thinking of as you were talking about this is we miss when other people put in their boundaries. Because it's not like they say, hey, hang on, I'm putting in a boundary here. Like, that's not really how it's not like a giant stop sign. It's more subtle. It's, I don't really feel comfortable talking about this right now. Or like it's just so much more subtle. Like I need some time. And you can often miss it when you're having your own little temper tantrum, You're
Right.
having your own little reaction of, oh my gosh, they're abandoning me, or oh my gosh, I need this information, or oh my gosh, we have to talk about this right now, or you're not loving me, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
We turn it into a story about ourselves not being good enough,
Mm-hmm.
that it's like this rejection, and we
Right.
completely miss the boundary, which is actually an opportunity to better understand each other and have a better relationship, like you just said.
Right.
You
And
know, you guys could have
right.
been really upset at each other,
Right.
or
And
you
it
just
could
have a
have
conversation.
exactly, and it could have like manifested into like me just like getting mad at him for changing the way that he shows up for me. When in
Mm-hmm.
reality, like I think I said this on the last episode, a boundary that somebody else sets is an opportunity to like look within and see how I can do better. And to
Mm-hmm.
be honest, now that I have to get my ass up and go get my own coffee, sometimes I find that I don't even really need that coffee. I just was being bored and like, a baby on.
Mm-hmm.
Or like I wasn't taking responsibility to get myself what I needed. And that's not to say he doesn't help me out sometimes. Like I'm terrified of the stove, so he still does help cook, but it's more on his schedule, and that's cool. Like I feel like setting these boundaries and being very vocal and clear with each other has been a great opportunity for me to take more responsibility for the things that I want and need for myself. And it's also just improved the respect that we have for each other. Like I'm not just sitting around while he does everything. Like that wasn't fair. But it's that little tiny thing, that little tiny boundary has had a ripple effect in our relationship.
Absolutely. It opens the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It completely opens the conversation to learn more about each other in the little things that kind of set us off, set our, old wounds off or whatever, and being able to jointly come together in a better relationship, especially when it comes to romantic partners, because you're literally like together 24/7. It's
Right.
the like the parent child relationship, the husband wife relationship, like those are our most intimate relationships where we don't get a break from each other,
Mm-hmm.
and so a lot of crap comes up. So I love that you guys were able to hear each other in a quick fashion
Oh, it
versus
wasn't
it.
quick. It was painful. I'm saying this like, oh, everything was hunky dory. Like no, there was a long time where it was like, I'm not getting you a goddamn coffee. Get it yourself. Like it wasn't a pretty process, but like we're there now.
Okay, well then that's exactly it, where he you guys finally figured out how to communicate and hear one another. And
Mm-hmm.
it takes some humbling to be able to hear another person when over your own internal voices,
Right.
as well as being able to hold your own boundary and communicate it to the best of your ability. And
Right.
you know, holding it is one thing and communicating it is another thing, because sometimes you have to, communicate it differently, not just yelling and screaming, I'm not getting your goddamn coffee, versus when you ask me for this, I feel this.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and I probably like, I probably resisted quite a bit with the boundary that he was setting, and then finally, for whatever reason, he just said it in a way that I heard it, and I couldn't. Once I truly hear somebody say something, which I mean, in all fairness, I am 30% deaf, but I'm just kidding. Like once I once I finally hear what somebody is saying, like trying to tell me, like I can't unhear it. Like now I know, and now I'm gonna do better. So it took me a while. It took a lot of repetition. It took him actually holding that boundary. for long enough that I said, you know what? I will get my own goddamn coffee and I'm gonna love it.
Yeah. And I think the other piece to that is a willingness to continue to try and understand and to have a willingness to not just listen to the voices in your own head,
Mm-hmm.
but actively trying to figure out what the other person is communicating or why you're responding in a particular manner.
Right.
And if you are having somebody either setting a boundary or you set a boundary and someone's continuing to come up against it, you need to look at that. Do I have a willingness to hear the other person
Right.
or hear why I'm reacting to this, why I'm throwing a temper tantrum? Like, if you feel that you are throwing a temper tantrum, like, come on, let's look at our own behavior here.
Right.
Uh, but if the other person is continuing to throw a temper tantrum, you also need to recognize that, again, you can't change somebody's behavior. And if they don't have a willingness to be self aware, that's a big sign too, because you need to protect your peace. And continuing to have somebody come up against your boundary over time can be very draining.
Right.
So, a willingness to find the communal piece, I guess you could say, versus just a one sided piece is also something to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you said willingness because I think, there's definitely some examples as you were talking where I've noticed that somebody was attempting to set a boundary, and this is like, probably like in the last couple of years. Um, I've noticed they were trying to set a boundary with me, and I was like almost intentionally not listening. I just wasn't ready to hear it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like aware of it, but like not necessarily doing the work to like meet them where they needed meet where I knew they wanted me to be. And like I wasn't I'm making myself sound like an asshole, but like
No, but you're
I was
you're literally normal. Like, I'm listening to you say this and going, "Yep, I completely understand."
I was like noticing like, okay, I'm interrupting this person's peace, I guess, and I know they're trying to set a boundary here. But I'm not ready or willing or able to do the work. So like I guess an example is like trying to like at work I was having a really hard time with like part of my job. Um which I've since like moved into a slightly different role. And my coworker was getting frustrated with me because she was kind of having to pull the weight on this part of our job. And it was because it just wasn't clicking for me, like I wasn't getting what she was wanting me to do. And so I was procrastinating and avoiding uh this particular task every time it came up, and I could tell that it was driving her crazy. She was really trying to push me to learn it fast, and I was very aware of that tension. I could feel that she was frustrated with me, but I just my brain couldn't understand the concept behind what it was we were trying to accomplish. And so that's what I kind of mean when I say I wasn't really willing or ready to do the work. I could tell her, like, she was having to spend all this extra time and effort to pull her weight on that particular task, and it wasn't fair to her, and I felt bad, but I just had too much on my plate, or I was making excuses and couldn't figure it out. Since then, we've had a really open, honest, frank conversation, which led me to moving into a different slightly different career trajectory. But until I was honest and open with her about how I was feeling in terms of like what my role was, there was so much tension.
Mm-hmm. Did she end up setting a boundary with you on, you know, not pulling your weight or not getting this or whatever? Did she end up actively putting in a boundary with you so you guys could have that conversation, or more was it just like this undertone tension, no boundaries set, but you can really feel that there should have been boundaries?
So she wasn't really communicating that she was setting boundaries, but I could feel that she was trying, like she was mentally trying to set one. And I was mentally seeing and hearing it, but not doing anything about it because she wasn't really
Yeah.
verbalizing it. But now that we're on the same page about what I want out of my career, and it's not that I was sitting around like twiddling my thumbs or like sticking my thumbs up my butt, like doing nothing while she was doing all the work. I was just doing other tasks and other things, that like were easier for my brain to conceptualize and work on. Um,
Yeah.
and I was just overwhelmed. So like when I get overwhelmed or when something is really too hard for me to grasp, I do everything else instead of the thing that's hard for me. Um,
Absolutely.
it's
I
not,
think
yeah. Go ahead.
I think that's an absolute normal response.
Hmm.
And having somebody set a boundary and you not being willing to accept it is also perfectly normal, because
Hmm.
like we talked about, you're when you get upset about somebody putting in a boundary, it's because them not having a boundary is serving you. So you want to
Right.
protect that self-serving. You want to be able to continue to get something from somebody or soothe yourself, which was you could continue to avoid doing the thing that you knew that she wanted you to do,
Hmm.
but it was uncomfortable for you. So
Right.
you didn't have to face yourself and make
Right.
those changes. It was a self-soothing technique to avoid and to continue to push against a boundary that didn't suit your needs.
Right. Right. And it never really manifested into a conversation. It was just like a conversation that we both knew that we were having, that we weren't actually having, and nothing was getting
Mm-hmm.
addressed.
Yeah.
um,
Yep.
I mean that right there is why communicating these boundaries are so important. And now, I mean, we get along just fine, and I love her. She, I think she likes me. Um, I know she likes me. um, and now that like I'm sort of moving on to a different career path, she actually made a joke the other day. She was like, "Now I know why you didn't want to do this thing." And she's like, it's like we're able to like the tension's completely gone, and we have like a mutual respect for each other again, that like there's no more tension. I wish we would have had that conversation at the time because it would have alleviated so much anxiety, probably for
Mhm.
both of us.
Yeah. But if you didn't have the capacity for it, because I think that's
Right.
something else of, you might be aware of things or maybe you're not aware. So there's different phases of becoming more human, is the
Mhm.
awareness of your behavior and how it's impacting others, the willingness and ability to actually start to make changes, and then there's the willingness and vulnerability, like to be vulnerable, to step up to the plate and sort of lay out your shame, your guilt of why this is self serving, right? Like you actually have to own that in
Right.
order to have a conversation and the fear of rejection. Because when you come to somebody and go, geez, man, I know this is really making you upset, but it's actually serving me and it's allowing me to continue to use you to avoid my own stuff. Like that's a lot of shame and guilt on that when you have that awareness. And to present that to somebody else where they may not validate that, they may be angry and go, yeah, no, you treated me like crap and I'm done. Like they may walk away. So you have to put yourself on the line And sometimes we're just not ready for that. There's too much fear around that versus certainty of your own worth to be vulnerable, where that person's actions and response doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything about whether or not I'm actually a good employee or whatever. Like, you're able to take ownership. So I think you had the conversation when you had integrated enough awareness and confidence in your own situation, where you were like, yeah, no, these tasks, I don't actually like them because of XYZ. It's not that I don't want to do them. It's not that I
Mm-hmm.
can't do them. It's just, it's irritating because it's not my path.
Right. Exactly. Like this task, I felt the task wasn't meant for me, and it was like, so I didn't want to do it. I couldn't get myself to like, or I could have gotten myself. I just was choosing not to.
Mm.
And so it was almost like this like song, like this like little dance that we were doing around the issue.
Yeah.
um, and I mean, I can think of so many examples of this, and I'm sure you can too. Um, but I feel like, I feel like we've definitely very clearly made a case for like why, like what is important about boundaries, and like why it's important to communicate them. But like for somebody who is listening right now that's like struggling to either set a boundary or hear a boundary, or be willing to like, you know, to shift their behavior to meet their own boundaries or somebody else's, like what are some thoughts or ideas or actions that we can offer them to like help them sort of like shift into this mode of like accepting boundaries?
Okay, that is such a good question. And I will be completely transparent and forthcoming. Um, Boundaries were something that I didn't know even, gosh, like 8, 9 months ago. I didn't fully understand what they were. I mean, we naturally, I think, set boundaries for the little things, but we don't fully understand why we're setting them, and what their purpose truly is in the whole, like, you have to change your behavior, you're not changing other people's behavior kind of thing. So I think there's just, first and foremost, permission to still be learning, permission for it to be uncomfortable, and permission for it to feel icky
Mm.
while also peaceful. Because it's not, well, for the really, really tough ones, the ones where people are like really abusing the situation or you don't feel safe with, those ones are going to be a little hard. Those
Yeah.
ones are going to be icky. Um, find yourself a buddy who understands what boundaries are, whether that's a counselor, whether that's a friend who has gone through a similar situation, or maybe not necessarily even a similar situation, but just somebody who has had to implement proper boundaries, who has the understanding and background that you can then bounce your ideas and feelings off of, I think is really, really key, because our friends are great, but if they don't have the awareness to play devil's advocate, play, like, really help you understand what your control is, what your power is, what your response is versus what the other person is doing,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably going to come across a lot of difficulties to hold it and to integrate. So
Right.
the number one is to find a boundaries buddy and just know that it's going to take work.
Yeah.
But
It's,
when it happens, like, it's the right thing when you feel peace afterwards.
yeah.
And you don't have to respond right away to anything. You can just, thanks, I'll get back to you. You know, I need some time to think about this. Like, just remove yourself.
Absolutely. I'm
That's a
wondering.
boundary.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
that's a boundary in and of itself. But that gives you time to calm your nervous system to then be able to think clearly, what is my ultimate goal? And is that more about me than it is about changing them?
Absolutely.
Find yourself a buddy, a counselor, somebody, somebody that can
Yeah,
help, really.
exactly. I think that's crucial. And like it's like we were saying earlier in our conversation, like if I didn't have you or like a couple of my other people in my
Mm-hmm.
corner, like constantly just like reminding me to be patient with myself and be patient with the other person and just like reminding me that this is like a marathon, not a sprint, not to be corny.
Yep.
Um, like I don't know if I could have made so much progress in terms of not just recognizing and respecting my own boundaries, but recognizing and respecting other people's boundaries. Like, I, I don't know where I would be. I probably wouldn't be adhering to any boundaries still without my boundary buddies.
A
Um,
100%, a
yeah,
100%. They literally will help you because you'll fall down. Like you won't be able to necessarily hold your boundaries all the time, but by having somebody there to take in your emotional response and help you neutralize it so that you can come from a place of centeredness on what your values are and what your actual goals are. Because the person that you're setting boundaries with, like we talked about, is going to do manipulation. They're going to try and get you to not have your boundary. They're not necessarily going to have their own self awareness or willingness right off the hop.
right,
So it's going to be tricky and it's going to be difficult and it's not going to feel good if you've been a people pleaser and like no boundaries for such a long time.
right.
So a boundary buddy will save your ass.
Absolutely. And then I think the other thing too is for me is also having grace with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like you don't just wake up one day for the most part and say, this is my boundary. Like doesn't work
Mm-hmm.
that way. It's something that's like almost like built brick by brick, stone by stone, like piece by piece, and like give yourself grace. You might end up like completely disregarding your own boundaries, but that's part of the process, and it's part of and sometimes some boundaries you might see clear as day the moment they need to be set, and you might be able to adhere to them from that first moment. But a lot of boundaries it might take time. It might take a lot of failures. Um, but it doesn't mean that you're not meant to have that boundary, and it doesn't mean that you're not good at holding them. It just means that one's a little bit tougher than other ones.
100%. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is, you hit the nail on the head with all of that.
Yay.
Absolutely all of that. It
It must be
takes
my birthday
time,
wisdom.
right? It absolutely takes time for the really hard, tricky ones with the people that are truly using you for their own benefit and are really upset that you are pulling away. But ultimately, the whole like you have to love people from afar, that will you'll gain so much more clarity on yourself, on them, on people, on everyone's own journeys to becoming more aware and willing to communicate properly and respectfully. Like it just, your life is going to benefit so much, but you're going to fumble. It's
Yeah,
not necessarily the easiest process, but it is such a rewarding process in the long term.
absolutely. And
And
just
long term
remember
can literally be like 6 months.
and just remember to celebrate. Like as you're
Oh,
setting them
yeah.
and you're feeling yourself just feel better by setting these boundaries, just like celebrate and like get excited because boundaries are sexy.
Boundaries are so sexy. You celebrate with that boundary buddy every little
Exactly.
thing that you do. And remember, you also set boundaries with yourself in your mindset
Yeah.
too.
Well,
You
because they're
that
about
I think
you.
is, yeah, it truly is more about you. Someone's reaction to them is more about them, but how their reaction is is emotionally, your emotional response to that is about you. So it's such a beautiful way to grow yourself. And some
Absolutely.
boundaries you only need for a short period of time, and other
Exactly.
boundaries you may need longer, and you may need to put more in and more in and more in as you seek more and more peace, which will allow you to heal your emotional response and take ownership of your reactions to things and how you communicate things so that you are in a better state to be vulnerable and open with that person. Like you talked about your colleague, it can take time to get to that place of actually feeling safe enough in and of yourself that whatever their response is to your vulnerability, you don't take personally anymore. And
Exactly.
having boundaries allows that growth. It allows your nervous system to stop responding to this unsafe environment.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for all of you guys to start setting boundaries. Like if this episode helps you, like please let us know. Please like tell us about your boundary stories. Like we want to celebrate you.
Yeah.
Whether that's on social media or like even in a future podcast episode, like I definitely eventually want to have an episode where we just like share anonymously, if you guys are willing, the stories that you're sharing with us about how like listening to this podcast is helping you think about becoming more human AF. So share your stories for sure. Um, and we just want to celebrate you. And I think
Yeah.
I'm just thinking off the top of my head, there are definitely some books and like resources that like I want to try to put in the show notes on this episode and boundaries part one. Um, about like how to set and uphold and communicate your boundaries. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but as I come up with them, I will put them in the show notes for those episodes.
Yeah. I feel like I can, for my own situation, I feel like I can list a whole bunch of things, a bunch of
Yeah,
resources, but
yeah. So we want
it's,
to like give you guys a resource hub for sure.
yeah, just let us know kind of where you're struggling with boundaries or the types of people that you're just your body, because your body doesn't lie. Your body's just not feeling good around. Your body's
Mm-hmm.
reacting to. When you notice that, when you have that self-awareness, bring it to us if you need some guidance. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
happy to kind of give our own perspective. We are not counselors in any way, but
No,
we can at least kind of be a safe place for you and just share our own experiences and help you however we can.
absolutely. All right, guys. Well, if you absolutely loved this episode of Human AF, be sure to give us a 5-star rating, a lovely review, and be sure to tell a friend all about it. And of course, don't forget to follow the show on Amazon, iHeart, and Spotify. And maybe by the time this episode comes out, we'll be on Apple too. Maybe not. Who knows? um, but anyway, we love you guys so much, and just keep being human AF.
Yeah, tag us on social media, share your stories. We love you guys, and we will see you in the next episode.
Yay!
Bye.